Hello and welcome back to another Union Arena Deck Tech. Today I've got Tsmmaa, or Tsmmaa as I call him, with me again. So we're talking about one of the more unique strategies in all of Union Arena, including in Japan and the Asias, Purple Dark Triad from Black Clover. This deck can win in two distinct ways: by shrinking your opponent's board into nothing so that you can swing through with bigger cards that, well, they're going to be forced to chump block or lose with, or through a really stupid tree. I love it. This deck is fantastic. So, today we're going to have you go over some of the identities of this deck and everything else that people need to know. So, what's the core identity of this deck? Do you see it more as a control, a combo, or an aggro deck that just so happens to have an alternative win con?
Yeah, this is definitely an aggro deck. I'm kidding. The Purple Dark Triads is definitely going to be one of the premier control decks. Having 2, 6, 10 nullify impacts throughout mid, early, and late game, you definitely have the ability to control the board and put up blockers and cycle through your deck to make sure that you're not chipping away too much life while milling it and making sure that your opponent sweats a little bit every time you draw a card and discard a card. So this is definitely going to be one of the premier control decks. So
for players unfamiliar with the tree, how does it specifically work?
So yeah, the tree, basically the first line is the most important. At the end of your attack phase, if you have no cards in your deck and 3 or more Dark Triad affinity cards with unique card names, you win the game. So basically at the end of your attack phase and you have Dante, Zenon, and Vanica, you say, I win. And basically they have to accept it and shake your hand. But the second part of that tree is when you activate main, you can send 4 of your sideline to the removal area. And when you do draw a card, place it to your hand and sideline. So it's a great shuffle card and it helps you cycle your deck. But basically this tree is the win condition.
Okay, so moving right along, on the other hand, because you don't always have time to get to all of that, and sometimes your opponent has a bad draw, do you have an alternative win con and strategy to just take over the game with outside of the tree?
Right, so a lot of the times with this deck, I find myself putting up this giant wall of 4Ks. So this wall incorporates the rare Dante, so this is what my Dante looks like, but you might have this one. This Dante has one main ability, but 2 effects with that main ability. So main, once per turn, you can sideline 4 from your sideline to your removal, and it either gets damage 2, which is great if you want to become that rush deck that I said, or which one I use more often is sideline 4 from your sideline to the removal. You get double block and nullify impacts. So this way in the late game, Dante becomes this big 4K body that has both double block and nullify impacts. So it becomes a structured wall. As well as the main killer monster in this deck, the Dante 5-drop Dante. When played, your opponent, 2 of your opponents lose 1k BP. This way you can control their front line to make sure that they don't get a lot of swings in, while when you attack, you get your swings in and you get the sideline 2 every turn. So these are the main big bodies of the deck, and you'll hear about the rest of the deck later.
Okay, so moving right along, can we go through the curve of this deck, starting with the zeros and going over what each of these cards' roles are, moving up to the 1s, the 2s, the 3s, the 4s, and then the 5?
Right, so first one I'm going to talk about, I love seeing this in my starting hand, is Vanica, the 0-cost Vanica. So this doesn't have the on-play ability of draw 1, sideline 1, rather is when sideline, draw a card, place 1 in your hand into the sideline. So that's something different. Usually purple has this. Moving on, we have the Dantes. This is a get triggered from your hand. And then 2 Zenons. These are nullified. I put only 2 of them because they don't have any trigger. But you can see moving on, there's more Zenon fodder for your raid. This is the 1 cost. When sidelined, look at the top 3 of your deck and pick a Dark Triad or Devil Affinity card added to your hand. So this is great because when you sideline it, and you do have your own sideline abilities, this is a card where you get one of the three, and you don't have to sideline anything from your hand. So this is a great resource grabber. Moving on to the twos, this Dante is one of the only when played effects. When played, look at the top card, choose to sideline the top card or leave it back on the top. So this is 90% of the time you want to sideline that card. The 10% of the time is if you see one of your big pieces, or this 3-cost Zenon. Zenon is when played, sideline one other character on your field. If you do, draw 2 cards. So this is great for comboing in your turn. So you would play this on your third turn, sideline a Vanica. You would draw 3 cards, sideline 1, and then afterwards you now up 2 draw resources and much more power. So that is really the curve for early game. Late game, you have the ability to drop these monsters, which includes Vanica 2 AP, draw 2, sideline 1. And when this is sidelined, you get to free play one of your 2 costs or lower as rested. So this is a great free play. And then these are your raids, which I'm sure we'll touch on later.
Okay, so moving right past that, we see how the deck can have a very strong stall strategy. Oh no, I'm chump blocking early, draw a discard, and all of this other stuff. Now let's move over to the meat and potatoes. All of these raiders, these honestly astoundingly powerful cards for just being raiders in a stall deck.
Yeah, so I think the main one I want to talk about is this Zenon. So this Zenon is only 4 cost energy, but when raided, becomes a monster of the beast. When raided, it gets its nullify impact, so it becomes a strong blocker for your front line. And when attacking, every single time it attacks, you draw a card. If your opponent decides to block, you could sideline that card, and honestly, that becomes more mill for you every single turn. It has a main ability, so once per turn, you could place 4 from your sideline to removal, and then this card cannot be blocked by 3,000 or less. So if you want to put your opponent in the situation where he is forced to block with a 4K or higher, you can use this ability. But honestly, I like putting the 4 cards from the sideline using this Dante or this tree more than this Zenon, because this Zenon already has the ability to draw you those cards. You would rather keep those cards most of the time.
Correct.
Moving on, these Dantes, like I said, what I like using this is as a more of a defensive mechanism. So say they are attacking your life and you have 5 energy in the backline. One of these flips from your life, you're rated on, all his 4K attackers become 3K. Or 2 of them at least, 2 of them become 3K, and you can have a really nice safe turn on that. And then afterwards, this effect actually lasts until their next turn. So basically you have your turn to use your specials, or you could push more damage because their 4Ks now become 3. So these are the strong monsters in your deck. Vanica, not that big BP, but becomes a good cycle mechanic. These Dantes become double blockers, null. This Zenon becomes a drawing machine, and this Dante becomes a shrinker, while having the ability to sideline 2 every turn, so they know that they have to get rid of this unless they want to push for the win. Then they would probably aim for null impact.
All right, so moving right along through all of that, this deck is known for this alternative win condition, but I think a lot of people don't realize how difficult it is to pilot in order to get to the trees activate at the end of your turn to, oops, I won the game. Can you walk us through a good sequence of setup from being on the play and being on the draw to make sure you're giving yourself that minute advantage to be able to self-mill and win the game?
Right, so early game is really important with this deck, because if you don't have a good setup, a good energy line, a lot of this pieces won't be able to get played early. As every deck wants, you want to have at least 2 to 3 zeros to 1, and then from there on, the main combo that I like doing is Vanica, Dante, say turn 2. You want to go second with this deck because you get that 1 extra draw. Turn 2, you get, say, a Zenon, and then here it becomes spicy. If you do have the ability, you would Dark Triads to get 1 more AP. Zenon pop your Zenon or Vanica, depending if you want that extra sideline or that extra draw. You get to draw 3 cards. Usually, if you're lucky, you get another final. If not, you could just play a Tree of Glove. So now you have your backline fully set up with 2 double energy generators and a raid fodder. So now your game is basically set from there. And then after that, you can decide if you want to either bring out your Dante to mill 2 every turn, or if you want to play more on the defense, set up this wall of 4Ks in which every turn you could decide, hey, do I want to become a menacing damage 2, or do I want to become that double blocker nullify impact? So that's the early to mid game. Develop these pieces and then create these double energy generators. So every turn you can have the ability to have that impact.
Oh, that is wonderful. So, can we go over a couple of the key matchups that you think tree players need to be aware of? Do you think that there's any really polarizing matchup that you're like, I don't think you can win? Or do you think instead there's any matchups that when you sit across them, you go, I win?
As they say, I have no enemies. No. So the purple triads, since this is a relatively new deck, like I haven't had the chance to test against everything, but honestly, some decks have the ability to, tech if they want to play aggro, they want to play more control, more mid-rangey. Purple wants to play their own game, right? They just want to mill. They just want to swing. They just want to have fun and diminish their deck. I would say the harder matchups are those matchups that have a lot of removal. So that would be Sakuna, UG bouncers, one new one, Bambi. Bambi has a lot of rest. So even yellow Gojo. So basically what happened is they rested 2 of my characters for a lot of the game. And this would stop my draw. This would stop my double blocker. And getting to those specials, if you're not a draw heavy deck, is usually pretty hard. So a lot of decks that have a lot of rest, so I would say yellow decks, this would be one of the more painful matchups. Against green decks, you guys are just racing to who gets to their bigger monsters first, right? Do I get to mill half my deck before your 7-drop Kirito comes out or your 7-drop Vermilion comes out? It becomes a race to whoever gets the resources first. And honestly, against an aggro style deck, I believe this double blocker with null impact is such a great tech. So those are the matchups. Yellow being the worst, green is a very fun matchup, and red is more, can I survive until they run out of resources?
So last thing I want to go over is how do you identify turn 1 or turn 2 if you can be the aggressor in the matchup with all of your cards, meaning you can be attacking their life and taking everything from them, or if you want to be aiming for the hyper mill strategy trying to get to your tree? How do you identify that early game?
Realistically, I identify myself as a very mill-centric player. So I play, Green Saitama, Muzan, and I guess now the Dark Triad. So a lot of the times I start off the game thinking, let's mill, let's get to our resources. But sometimes a lot of players, they don't respect your aggression early. So if you have that early game setup I had previously, you have your double energy generators. The next turn, you could just drop 3 of these Dantes, and then you would have a lot of sideline ready to trigger all their active mains. Say they swing in and you don't block, you take 2 life. Next turn, these all become active, or they become active, ready to attack. And say you have a raid ready, you raid this Dante. So now you have 3 Dantes and this 5-cost Dante that minus their board by 2 of their board characters by 1,000. Double damage, right? So you activate, and now you start swinging at their life. 2, 4, 6. If they let all of that through, that's 6 damage in 1 turn. And then, if not, they're forced to block with their big units that they spent so much time working on.
Yeah.
And 6 life, if that's an empty life trigger, the game is basically done. And then you can make fun of your opponent, say, hey man, I didn't even get to mill my deck. But honestly, I don't really go for that play because I know their life is usually not empty.
Yeah, yeah, that's fair enough. But hey, I am that type of player that really enjoys when my deck has more than one path to victory. So,
Exactly.
big shout out to you, Tsmmaa, for joining us again and sharing your thoughts on this fantastic and unique deck. Whether you're playing for control or going for the tree win, this deck has some really cool lines and hidden power once you learn how to pilot it. So, where can everybody find you on the internets and shout yourself out?
Yeah, come join me, Rumble Rama server, Canadian. We play locals every single week, and honestly, I will promise to start making more YouTube content. I love making tier lists and just talking about the meta once in a while. Thank you, Zoe, so much for having me. Subscribe to the channel, subscribe to his channel, and see you next time.
See you around, guys. Bye.